don't know me, I'm Jason Garnar. I'm the Broome County Executive, and some of you, I don't know if you remember that vice presidential debate when Ross Perot was the presidential candidate, and he was sort of like, who am I? Why am I here? I'm actually going to be the moderator. I've known Mark for about 6 years. Before Mark was a congressman, he was a county executive, and I got to know him a little bit. He'd come up to Broome County to talk about some things like Think Differently, which is a really cool program that he started in Dutchess County. But we really got to know each other during COVID, and how to manage that whole ordeal. He asked me to moderate because this is Broome County, and it's an honor to do so. And I think we're going to get right into it. And the last thing I want to say is I really appreciate Mark doing this. It's not an easy thing doing this. Not every member of Congress gets in front of a group of citizens that just can ask him or her questions, and I really respect that he wants to do this. And there's a lot of stuff going on in Broome County, and I'm looking for Mark to partner with Mark on a number of things over the next 2 years. Election's over with. It's time to get to work and roll up our sleeves and work together to do some things. So I'm sure a lot of people have questions and things to say. Looking around the room, it looks like all the Republicans are over here and the Democrats are over here. I think, I'm just kidding. It's a joke.
There's all of us.
Absolutely.
Those of us in the middle.
And you're all the way over there. So I think what I'll do is I'll just if you have a question for Mark, what I would just ask is that you be respectful and civil, and I think that's a very simple thing that we can all ask for. And I'll just go around and take questions, and Mark will answer them. And we have until about 6:30. Maybe we'll end it at 6:20. Start winding down at 6:20. But you want to say a few things.
And I want to start by where Jason kind of left off. Not the timing, but we are friends, and we have worked together over the course of the last several years. And if you served in local government, in particular, if you've ever served in county government, you would know the 2 years during the pandemic and economic shutdown, county governments were stretched to the extreme. And in many ways, the county governments were the face in New York of response. And there were decisions made that we agree with or don't agree with. There were ones we liked and didn't like. And there were days, believe me, that even my wife wanted to scream at me, while there were days we knew together that we were also trying to save lives. And so that was a challenging 2-year period that really brought county leaders together. I appreciate that relationship. I'm now the member of Congress representing 11 separate counties. I love all of my children equally. But I obviously have a special place in my heart for Broome County, mostly because we work together so well. There are challenges that are local and unique to Broome. There are challenges, of course, facing this district and the state and country that are more broad, and we'll get to all of them. So before we do that, though, only some of you have heard my poor jokes and background before. So I just want to open with why I value what we're about to engage in. I truly value this, and I do think it is the job of an elected official, regardless of the layer or level of government you work in, to listen to and learn from the people you represent. It is also incumbent upon the people I represent to recognize that you are not the only people I represent, and you have views that are going to be different from county to county, person to person, table to table, family to family. We just left Cortland County, had about 100 residents there. This is Townhall number 4. Townhall number 4. Out of 11. We're going to have 11 over the course of 3 weeks. My goal is to have at least a county town hall meeting up front, and then there'll be more opportunities for us to do this. We'll sit down for coffee. There'll be smaller group meetings. We're going to do a telephone town hall meeting. My goal is to be sure that we are as accessible and responsive to you as is possible. And so, I come to this having spent all of my adult life in public service. I do believe it is, as Bobby Kennedy called it, a dignified duty, which means that we have an obligation to serve in one capacity or another. We have an obligation to do it with some decency and respect, and I'd like to try to hold myself to that standard. I started in local government as a village trustee, and a village mayor of a small village, 1,300 residents. We're not all related, but we are close. And I started in local government basically this way. And we had hundreds, I probably had 200 town hall meetings as a village mayor on everything from the big, like the desired extension of a rail line into my own village, to the small, what kind of playground equipment we were going to build at our village park. And we would get together and have these conversations, respectful of one another, listening to those disagreements and trying to mold some consensus. Fast forward to the last 12 years as county executive, I held over 275 town hall meetings, including those that we held during the pandemic, because I think it's important to listen to and learn from one another. You do learn in local government a valuable lesson, and that is, there are two that I offer. Number one, when the roof leaks, it leaks on Republicans and Democrats. And some of you have heard me say this before, but in local government, in your level of government, we don't have time to blame somebody for why the roof's leaking. We don't have time to pass the buck to somebody else to fix the roof. Everyone in the House is getting impacted. Our job is to fix the roof. I recognize Washington, Albany rarely fix the roof effectively, efficiently, or quickly enough. And boy, we spend far too much time talking about why the roof is leaking. The other is in local government, you recognize, even obviously much more so than serving even in Congress, although I do think like the House of Representatives is the last of the local offices, meaning you're rarely going to get your United States Senator or President to stand here and interact. And I'm not saying that that's special. I think that this is sort of the last local connection you have in sort of these offices. But in local government, you realize and recognize very early on that when you make a decision, it has an impact on real people. And you're more aware of that impact because you see it, you feel it, and you're interacting with the people that you represent. When I ran for village mayor, I could knock on every door 3 times. And if I went to one door and said I was a New York Yankees fan, and another door said I was a Mets fan, they'd figure out pretty quickly that I was lying. I'm a Mets fan, you can hold it against me. They'd figure out very quickly that you were lying. So you're held to this obligation to be as transparent as is possible. And I say as is possible because my wife looks great no matter what she wears. And so I never have any conversation about anything other than that. So my point is that in local government, we learn very quickly that the decisions we make have real impacts. Now, in this office, we are now in month 2 of my first term. I have 2 guaranteed years of representing you. We've assembled our offices, we've assembled our staff, there are people ready to work for you. My main office is in Binghamton, New York. That is our flagship office. We are fully staffed there. Our phones are finally operational. It took only 3 weeks for the House administration to turn things on, although I think the internet's still a little shaky, but not your internet, the house internet. But that said, main office in Binghamton, our secondary office is in Catskill, New York, and then we have partnerships in most of the counties that are the 11 counties of this district by appointment. We have offices there. Staff, you know some of the faces. You're going to see them. Their job is to be out in the community and responsive to you. And so if it's a federal matter, you want to call, reach out, we want to be responsive. And I guarantee you, we are not going to ask how long you've lived in the 19th Congressional District, and we do not care what your party affiliation is. And you don't even need to start with that. You don't even need to say, I voted for him, I didn't vote. I don't care when it comes to doing the job that the staff and the office is required to do. Our job is simply to ask, how can we help you? Sometimes we'll be really good at it. Other times it'll be complicated and challenging, but work with us. We want to be responsive and responsible to you. And so with that, I've been asked to serve on the House Agriculture Committee, the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, and the House Small Businesses Committee. Agriculture Committee, critically important. How many of you know what the Farm Bill is? Most, this is about what I get, a small number. The Farm Bill is America's agriculture policy. And every 4 years, Congress has to renew it or extend it. We are now in the reauthorization period, and I asked to serve on the Ag Committee for this very reason, to be a part of rewriting the Farm Bill, to focus on the challenges that upstate, in particular New York and Northeast farmers face, competitive disadvantage compared to other parts of the country, to talk about, by the way we can leverage agriculture in partnership with preserving our environment, how we can ensure education opportunities to grow a pipeline to jobs in agriculture, K through 12, secondary education. So very important, very critical. Also, the Farm Bill has 2 major components. The producers and the policy we use to support dairy farms and fruit farmers, and the consumers, not all of us, but those that need assistance to access quality nutrition, food stamps, and other services that provide assistance to adequate food security. I'm thrilled to be on the committee. For those of you who have heard my life story, you know I grew up on food stamps. I thought I was the luckiest kid at James V. Forest Hill Elementary School when I got a free lunch and all those other suckers had to pay. But it was, of course, my mother explained very quickly how we had subsidized lunches and how, by the way, food stamps helped my family, my mom, get back up on her feet and ultimately seek and achieve independence. I also, 12 years, ended up managing as a county executive the very Department of Social Services in this state responsible for the access to and management of Medicaid and food stamps. So I have that understanding and appreciation. Transportation infrastructure, very quickly, obviously, I was not in the Congress to consider the Infrastructure and Jobs Act. However, we're spending some $2 trillion in various aspects of infrastructure, from high-speed internet and cell service to rails, highways, roads, and bridges. It is this committee's job and task to provide oversight and accountability and expense of those dollars. Happy to talk about what I see are priorities and the partnerships we hope to launch to make sure upstate New York, the southern tier, and the other parts of this district that I represent have equity in access to those dollars. And lastly, small business, of course. Small businesses, whether they're family farms or even not-for-profits, are the backbone of New York's economy. You're the ones that pay our neighbors. You're the ones that keep our friends employed. You're the ones that subsidize and support those not-for-profit and athletic groups and so on and so on and so on. And so creating a level playing field for small businesses critically important. I'm happy to hear what's on your mind. As Jason said, I'm going to reinforce, if we can, just to be respectful of one another. We're all coming to this place with different ideas, backgrounds. I respect you. I respect your right to disagree with me. I respect this opportunity to be heard. I just have one warning, and there are a few of you who are here for another town hall meeting I had, and it's the same warning I always give. I know that I speak long, but the longer your question is almost guaranteed a longer answer. But that said, please feel free. I want to hear your opinions. We want to obviously be able to respond to some questions. And please know that I'm listening, and I mean that sincerely. We may not agree ultimately, or maybe we do. You may not agree with something somebody else says. We're listening, and the job, I hope, is to listen as carefully as I can, to learn from the people I represent, and then somehow mold consensus around important issues, knowing full well that you will judge me ultimately by two things. One, how many times I vote yes or no. Not many problems in the world are settled in yes or no answers. Not many problems in our households are ever addressed with only yes or no answers. But I recognize that you will judge me based on which button I push when I go to the House of Representatives, but also how we respond and react and represent you here at home. And I think that is critically important as well. And with that, County Executive, I'm leaving, and you enjoy. No.
So I think we're just going to go this side, that side, and we'll just keep going back and forth. And you won the first one. You had your hand up.
Oh, that's fantastic.
We'll let you go.
And you're under no obligation to stand up.
No one. Representative Molinaro.
Just Mark.
First, it's always great to see you back in the room. I'm happy to see you since the last time we met tonight. And I look forward to an opportunity to speak more about my one question, but it's a bit of a question. I need to write down some short call points. So, given currently that the mistruths or misstatements on the good economy that were given to us in the State of the Union, the fears of security due to what we are seeing on the southern border and with balloons flying over our heads, the increased tensions with Southeast Asia, Middle East, and of course, again, the southern border, looking at the apparent disconnect in Ohio and the demonization of American citizens, as we've seen in the Twitter files, as we've seen in many statements by President Biden in Philadelphia. Looking at all these challenges that are coming to us, and even most recently, and 3 hours ago, there was a YouGov informal poll where 76% of Americans, those who are responding to that poll, say they have lost their lack of faith in our government. I ask you, and I know it's a difficult question, you just got named, but what substantive legislation can you expect to propose or that you support that will answer some, or to some extent, these questions that are facing us?
So first, let's start with that poll, which is not new nor unique. Overwhelmingly, the American people have lost trust and faith in federal, first government, state, second government, and then the closer to the people you get, the more trust and faith they have. Local governments, I don't want to judge or do a poll of Jason Garnar and Broome County Executive. I'll leave that for the politicos. But I will say, obviously, when you get down to county and city and village government, generally speaking, people trust them more, mostly because you see them. And you can corner your mayor or your village trustee or your city mayor at the grocery store. So we have to work to reestablish that trust and faith. I think, by the way, that this is part of that exercise. Again, just being open with you. That's helpful. As to what I'm going to propose to deal with all the things you just covered, I'm hopeful tonight you might ask some questions that kind of narrow the focus. But I will say you as I started. I want to help rewrite the America's farm policy. That is important to this district. It's critical to not only American food security, but national security as well. Only about a decade ago, America produced enough food to sustain its people. We no longer do that, and there are real threats. There's threats get nervous. There's threats to, because of development taking up quality farmland, there's threats to the cost of farming, suburban subdivision otherwise. There's threats to farming because of the cost of doing business in particular, the management of the desire to convert and to incentivize renewable energy sources, sometimes take up valuable soils and farmland. You go on and on and on and on. Farm Bill, very, very, very important. As you likely know, my very first formal bill was the Think Differently Database Act. This was an effort to put into motion support for those with developmental, intellectual, and physical disabilities. Very important to many people I represent, and certainly something I've lived with and experienced as a parent of a child with a disability, trying to create more opportunities and access to the supports and services that those with disabilities face. I'm hopeful. You may have seen the other night. I only tell you this because most of you may have. If you watch through the State of the Union, the very end as the president was leaving, a colleague and I were talking to Senator Gillibrand, whom I've known for a number of years, and as that conversation broke up, we realized we were only one of a handful of people left in the House when the president was still there. I was shocked he was still there, actually. And so I went over to introduce myself for the second time. We had met briefly at a reception he hosted. Obviously wouldn't remember me. I wouldn't remember me in that moment either. And spoke to him on the floor. But offered this observation that I think that there is a great opportunity for us as a nation to find common ground on the opioid epidemic, public health crisis of our lifetime, on public safety, that there's good advancements that he embraces and we embrace that I think can provide not only security at our border, but also security and safety here at home, and that we could focus on mental health services and needing to address mental wellness. And I can only tell you that his staff, our staff, communicate, talk, and I'm hopeful to move the needle on some of those issues. Obviously, there are lots of things we're going to confront over the course of the next 2 years. Happy to talk about them, but those are at least to touch some of what we covered.
See what's going to happen if you ask a long question, you're going to get a long,
that was an obtuse question.
Long response. How about right here?
Hi, thank you for doing this. Thank you for having the courage to show up in person. That is a change. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.
You mentioned that you're concerned about rain falling on everyone, no matter what political party or even if you're an independent.
Yes.
The rain falls, it falls on everyone. Well, one of the two things that I'm worried about here that affect everyone. First is the economy.
Yes.
You have a direct vote coming up on this. Please, can you commit to raising the debt ceiling on a clean way without taking the American economy hostage? Because if you vote against raising the debt ceiling, that's going to end up defaulting potentially on U.S. debt obligations, which are bills that we already incurred and need to be paid. And it's been raised several times, even in the previous administration.
Yeah.
Secondly, you mentioned farming. I grew up on a farm. I listen to farmers. I pay attention to what's going on and what's affecting farmers. And besides the things you mentioned, you left off a big one, and that is climate change. And I also met people locally, young people at Binghamton University, who are afraid to have children because of the threat of climate change. It's affecting farmers even in New York State. Can you please commit to supporting urgent, large-scale action to save the habitable climate, because it's our biggest threat And in the US, there are already over 3 million jobs that are aligned with net zero greenhouse gas emissions, and renewable energy jobs are growing faster, and fossil fuel jobs are actually having layoffs. There are 350,000 jobs in wind and solar renewable energy. There's 50,000 in energy storage. There's a couple of hundred jobs already here, new employers in Binghamton area. Ubiquity Solar and Imperium 3 New York. I drove past those locations just on the way here. And the New Energy New York project is forecast to create 8,000 jobs in 10 years and have a $2 billion positive economic impact on our region. That's involved with battery storage. It's led by Nobel Prize winner of 2019, Dr. Stanley Whittingham of Broome University. So please can you commit to supporting both of these things, raising the debt ceiling and acting to save the habitable climate for our future?
Thank you. I did allude to, within the Ag Bill, using agriculture as a means of addressing climate change in the environment, and I'm sorry if I didn't offer it with some detail, but I generally support that as a marriage. I'm meeting with climate change advocates for that very conversation. How can the Ag Bill be used, Farm Bill be used as a means to enhance farming, but do it in a way that's sustainable and sensitive to climate change and environmental concerns. That's happening, I think, in March. The Farm Bill will be reauthorized probably September or October, so we're going to build toward that. That was a bit, I'll say respectfully, a bit of an obtuse kind of a question. I commit to supporting continued advancement of renewable energy sources. I will continue to support incentivizing that technology manufacturing here in upstate New York and Southern Tier. By the way, those employers are using the very tools that Assemblyman Marc Molinaro and others helped craft all those years ago when it comes to tax abatements, tax credits, most of those things, by the way, people object to, but nevertheless, the tools to incentivize those kind of manufacturers and job creators are things and tools that I embrace and see value, and I do think that this part of the state of New York can be a leader in the manufacturing end of renewable energy source, as we're starting to see that occur right here in Binghamton and Broome County. I see that. The other I'd offer to you is that we have an awesome opportunity, and I'll get to the debt ceiling, I promise you. We have an awesome opportunity with the investment of Micron in Onondaga as well. That is going to have an immeasurable impact on a few things: job opportunities, workforce needs, cost of living, housing, development. There's going to be a lot of issues that are going to come to the fore very, very quickly. When I met with Micron, the very first thing I said to them was, I want you to meet with Jason Garnar and Jared Cram, Mayor of Binghamton, because you're going to need housing well outside of the Onondaga, Syracuse area, and you're going to need workforce. And that workforce development needs to start right now in K-12, and there needs to be a partnership, and we have to focus on housing and the cost of housing. The other I'll tell you is I spoke to them, and I apologize, it's what I do, but I also spoke to them about one other obstacle to getting folks into the workforce, and that's access to quality, affordable daycare. And that large employers like Micron can put on the table the ability to drive down the cost of daycare to make it more accessible. One of the biggest barriers in particular for women to re-enter or enter the workforce universally, that should be addressed when these major employers, no matter if we like them or not, are using those tools, those tax abatements. That's one of the community commitments that should occur. This is what I will tell you. The president is negotiating with the House of Representatives on the debt ceiling, and that will continue until we have to take a vote, likely in June. The president said early on he wouldn't negotiate, but they're negotiating. There's been 2 meetings now between the speaker and the president. When the president spoke to the speaker, both the day of the State of the Union and then the next morning or the morning before, ahead of the National Prayer Breakfast, again expressed his desire to have those conversations. I am very much aware that America cannot default on its debts, and America needs to control its spending. But if you're asking me to say that those are not somehow related, I don't conform to that. It's kind of like saying, ultimately, and I believe this, if my kids run up my credit card, I got to pay the credit card bill. I recognize that. But once I pay up that credit card and I give the card back to my son or my daughter, I need to ask them to kindly try to manage their spending moving forward. And if the president, as he said, is honest and earnest about having those conversations, he will find pragmatic, sensible people like me willing to take that lead. But that has to happen in concert, and we have to be able to have that conversation ahead of any potential default, and that's June. But I am very aware that America cannot default on its debts. At the same time, America has to, no, we're not going to do that. There will be others who ask, but America also has to focus on its spending moving forward, changing its behavior moving forward. Just as, by the way, I would argue, if we want people to transition to renewable energy sources, the way we do that is to ask people to change their behavior moving forward. I know that you've relied on fossil fuels forever. We want you to embrace a new technology, a cleaner technology, change your behavior moving forward. That's my standard.
Question over here.
Yeah, I really feel that I'm losing sleep nights worried about the death.
Are you?
I am,
Yes, don't.
I am. Well, I don't understand, and forgive me that I'm a little dumb.
You're not dumb.
Oh, yeah, well, you don't know.
Well, I would never say it.
There's people here who will.
Yeah.
I don't understand what negotiation has to do with debt we have already incurred. It would kind of be like my buying a car, driving it off the lot, and yelling out the window to the salesman, saying, I don't intend to pay this. That's what we're dealing with. If we don't raise the debt ceiling, which has been raised a gazillion, my little bit of research even indicated that Reagan raised it 12 times.
And Trump.
And Trump, yeah, and Trump, and we're not going to, what are we going to negotiate?
It's a great question.
In the future, the negotiation should be based on the budget, not on debt ceiling. This is, and there are people threatening this, and as far as I'm concerned, Biden doesn't have to negotiate anything,
Well, that's,
because this has to be a done deal. The whole world would implode.
So your question is, what would he want?
Yeah, I
What are the
wanna
things
know,
that he would
I
want to?
really wanna know whether you're gonna vote to raise the debt ceiling, or you're gonna monkey around with these negotiations that have talked about catastrophic cuts.
no,
And
that's,
things
okay,
like
so,
Medicare,
yeah.
Social Security, and that's me.
Okay.
Did you stand?
I'm sorry.
Did you stand?
We're not doing this, so let me ask this question.
She's got a question.
I'm happy to answer if I stood or not, or sat. First of all, I would state again, I do believe that there has to be negotiation on future expenditures. I also, that's my view, we disagree. But I understand that America cannot default on its debts.
Doesn't preclude you making sure that we pay our bills.
So, but you used an analogy, I used an analogy, they're the same analogy. I know I have to pay my credit card bill, but before I unleash the ability to run up debt again, I want you to pay attention to how you spend money. That's what I would say before I went out to buy my car. So using your analogy, before I go to buy that car, I am likely to look at my budget and decide, can I afford this vehicle or not? And by the way, it has nothing to do with the owner. I went to the bank to borrow the money. Before I take out that debt, I'm going to make some changes to the way in which I spend money so I can accommodate that debt. So all I'm saying to you is, that's my standard. My standard is that we negotiate future expenditures and the concept of trying to root out waste, fraud, abuse. And by the way, the president said it. The president, see, I didn't hear the president perhaps the way you did, and I didn't hear it certainly the way some who say that he didn't even acknowledge it heard it. I heard him say, we have to address the waste in the abuse in ARP dollars. I heard him say that there is fraud and abuse that exists within the federal spending. I heard him say that, and he said that, I believe, as an acknowledgement to the speaker and to the rest of us, that at the very least, we're gonna have a conversation about how we spend money moving forward. That is entirely legitimate, and you will never get me to agree that considering debt is not a part of budget conversations. I'm sorry, the budget you and I have to spend at our house considers debt and revenue and expense. And so all I'm saying to you is I want that conversation to occur in concert, and then we'll take a vote when that time comes. But the good news is that is in June. Now, the other I will offer you is that we wouldn't be having this conversation today if they were right to begin with, and they were wrong. They said that when Congress adopted the last package, the omnibus spending bill, and with that, the understanding that they were going to raise the debt limit, they said that this would get us well through the year. 60 days later, they announced that we didn't. Why? Because the value of the dollar, because of the rate of inflation, and the rate of spending. And those are things that, moving forward, we just have to acknowledge. And if we can come to the table and have some agreement that we're going to be more responsible with future spending, then I'm confident we're going to get over this hump, just as we have many times. But it is not correct to say that debt limit votes don't often occur with spending changes. They have almost always occurred. Ronald Reagan did it, Joe Biden did it, others voted for debt limit increases with spending reforms. But let me say firmly, without hesitation, because this is the vote that I will absolutely hang my hat on. I am not voting to tinker with Social Security and Medicare, period, end of sentence. The only way you confront solvency and stability of those trusts, and they are trusts, you've paid into them, I'm paying into them, and others will pay into them, is through bipartisan, bicameral commission, which we've done in the past. Reagan did it, Kennedy's have done it, yes. And so there's an opportunity to address Medicare and Social Security. That should not happen in the budget negotiation, because it's a trust. It's guaranteed by a trust, and therefore I want to be clear on that.
Question from me here, right there.
I've been in law enforcement for about 18 years now.
Thank you.
Well, I'm just curious if you think you were your colleagues in Congress have anything with bail reform and to address that.
Yeah.
It's making our job very difficult.
I appreciate this. So first, agree with me or not, this gentleman deserves a round of applause for you know this from my previous life, and I will say that I wholeheartly embrace the position that what New York did on cashless bail is dangerous and wrong. And I think I said this once before, but I'll say it. Jason's heard me say this. Maybe the only time a New Yorker has ever said this. New Jersey did it right. And New Jersey did cashless bail and bail reform, recognizing that there are two systems of justice. People have money, people don't have money. And that needs to be confronted. There's a reason why Harvey Firestein wasn't in jail for all those years, because he could pay to stay out. Yet a poor kid might be in jail, not as, in jail for pretrial incarceration longer than he or she ought to be. Now, by the way, the reason New York State had to confront cashless bail is because New York City is an abomination when it comes to leaving people languishing in holding cells. I mean, it's not necessarily occurring in every county in the state of New York, but New York City has been awful in moving young people or anybody pretrial through the pretrial system. So that's number one. New Jersey maintained some judicial discretion, which is important, but also invested a huge amount of resources in what's called pretrial intervention. These are the services we give people to ensure they don't recommit while they're out in the community. Those are the kinds of tools, by the way, that my county put into effect that drove down not only violent crime 40% in 8 years, but also inmate population 50% in 4 years, because we invested in the right tools. And we didn't treat, and I don't like the term, so for those of you in law enforcement, I'll tell you right up front, I don't use the term dangerousness. The question is risk. Is there a risk that somebody, if left in the community, is going to commit a crime or violence against themselves or others? Is there a risk, and there are tools to assess that? That's a long way to get to your question, which is New York has to fix bail reform. It has to. It's undermining our ability to provide public safety. Now, what can the federal government do? Well, two things. One, we can make clear that when states do this, we don't have to embrace it. And so the federal government provides a lot of resources to states to assist with expanding community policing, law enforcement tools, etc. If you want those tools, you've got to at least focus on being responsible when it comes to those who commit crimes. If you commit a crime, you do have to be held accountable for it in some fashion. And so we're saying that states that, like New York, that have just opened the door in this case without reasonable fixes, they shouldn't get the same attention as those states that are taking advantage of and being smart with criminal justice reform. It's kind of like, if you didn't increase the drinking age, you weren't going to necessarily get highway dollars. That, I think, is a tool we can use. Second, I'll offer to you that we are, that the House majority is trying to put forward an appropriation to add new dollars for law enforcement across the country, not competitive grants, but rather direct aid, 200,000 officers across the country. That's a goal that we hope to achieve. And so at the same time, I will offer you, I'm just going to continue to speak out. And we ought to. And I'm not saying to you that we can't have reforms, we should. But what New York did is wrong. Oh, and the last is what we can also do. I've seen this firsthand. You may have, before, I think, Election Day, There was a horrible shooting in a hotel lobby in Poughkeepsie, New York. A family comes up for a college weekend and gets shot in crossfire. I was actually in the staging area where the district attorney, the assistant district attorney, law enforcement of all levels, federal, state, and otherwise, were trying to negotiate a way to bring these guys in to jail, to be held. And both the perpetrator and then associates. The amount of work it took for the district attorney to identify how to get to a federal offense was astronomical. Why do they want to get to a federal offense? Because prosecuting under federal, I don't mind hearing me again, but you don't want to keep hearing me. Because prosecuting under a federal offense comes with stiffer restrictions. And it took hours and hours and hours. Why? Because they needed to get around the weakness in cashless bail, discovery reform in New York law. Because they couldn't find a way to make it easier to get somebody who they know is dangerous off the street. The federal government can make it easier for prosecutors to access federal prosecution if there's a need to ensure safety and security. And those are the things that we'll focus on.
Yeah, back over here. Yes, sir.
Let's try to narrow the focus. Given that there's a large Ukrainian population in the Tri-Cities, given that Matt Gaetz has recently introduced a Ukraine fatigue resolution in the Congress suggesting that America is tired of helping Ukraine in its fight for survival of Russia, are you also tired of helping Ukraine fight Russia to protect its freedom? And do you think that this Congress is incapable of protecting us, the United States, against fascist regimes?
I'm not tired, and I don't think this Congress is tired. I will just offer you out loud that I hold the same standard that I will hold whether the dollar spent in your community or someplace else. I'm just going to ask lots of questions. That's all. I do expect justification for American dollars being spent, but I will make it very clear to you that I am absolutely certain that America has won, not one W-O-N, one O-N-E, one, has to stand firm against Putin and regimes like his who are threatening the national security of other people. That is America's, it's always been America's role in the world, and frankly, I believe that we ought to sustain that. We also should take every step to bring Putin to justice in some way and be held accountable for what is a criminal action and outright aggression toward innocent, a sovereign nation, innocent people. Thirdly, the dollars that we have spent, I want to be sure in asking questions that those dollars have gotten to the places we say they're supposed to. In particular, America's humanitarian aid has gotten actually affected and is being implemented as we say, but I have not grown tired. America cannot grow tired. And even though we are all of a perspective that, maybe we don't want to spend more, maybe America has to stand firm against that kind of aggression. Now, I want us to be very, very circumspect when it comes to how far America is willing to go. Not necessarily the expenditures, but boots on the ground. I am not there. And if you're asking me to be there, and I don't think you are, that is one thing that I would take exceptionally seriously. The vote to send people into battle, and the president ought to honor this. The president should not find ways to circumvent Congress's role in determining whether or not America uses military force in any way. I'm not saying he has. I'm just saying that presidents have found ways to put American boots on the ground in places, and that is the sovereign role of Congress, and it needs to be acknowledged. Thank you.
Back over here. Yes.
Thank you. Congressman, congratulations.
Mark.
I'm not comfortable with that. You've earned the right to be called Congressman.
I'll take it from you. Thank you.
As you should.
I know it.
So, but the end of my question is a why. Just bear with me for 42 seconds, because that's all it's going to take. 13 states have completely banned a woman's right to choose, completely. Another bunch of them stand where you are, or at least what you told me at the previous meeting, somewhere between 6 and 10 weeks, which you and I disagree on. But 13 states have banned it, forcing women to have no rights and no choice about their own body. Those same 13 states, in addition to others, have not banned assault weapons. I find this so incredibly incongruous that my brain cannot process that information. I'm almost done, I promise. The same states have also banned books in their schools. Governor DeSantis is
know the 40% number, I don't know the other percent, but a large percent of them are better for negative history in treating African Americans and Native Americans who knew the story. It is, Kevin McCarthy needed 15 votes to be voted as the Speaker of the House. In order to get that role, he made a pact with some of the Freedom Caucus, and let me just say this, the more right-wing members of the Congress, such as Martin Taylor, bringing the right down to be incredibly disrespectful of the state of the union. Regardless of how you feel about politics, I think decorum, as you asked during this room, is required. My question is, why did you choose to align yourself with a party that wants to, in large part, take away a woman's right to choose, as is happening every moment, support killing through guns? Our country has one of the highest rates of gun deaths on the planet. All I'm asking for, and luckily we live in New York, and so automatic weapons here are not allowed, but these things happen. Why did you choose to align yourself with a party that is so repressive that there are mornings, nights that I don't sleep because I feel like I'm living in a Handmaid's Tale, which I read Margaret Atwood's book when I was a kid. I know it's real.
Wow.
Why?
So that is a very big question.
I know,
Um,
but you're a really big man.
no, I'm 5'8.5", although I lie and say I'm 5'9". Sorry, there you found my dishonesty.
I'm okay with that.
I obviously don't see it entirely the way you do. I think that there is a spectrum of ideology on both sides of the political aisle. I am at times offended by people in my party and offended by people in the Democratic Party. What I try to do and will always try to do is be respectful of our differences and move people toward what I think is right. I'm a registered Republican, and I have grown up in this party in this state. I often joke, some of you have heard me say this before, I think, I married a Democrat from Virginia, which means she's a Republican in New York. There's a broad ideological spectrum that I don't get to decide who Georgia sends to the Congress. I get to decide, and you get to decide who you send, and my job is to somehow, in my observation, take my personal beliefs, which obviously are a little bit different than yours on certain issues, we acknowledge that. Perhaps, on some issues, yes, on other issues, probably not. I have to figure out a way to take my personal perspective, weigh it against what you hope me to do and say, and then negotiate it with other people. The only thing I will say specifically, I will adhere to appropriate decorum. I do think it is not respectful to catcall and to yell, and that's not my thing. I also really do. I lost track of the answer, and I want to give it to you. I understand your observation and the way you characterize some of the rules changes that happen in the House, but I can tell you that my voice is now as powerful as theirs. That at the end of the day, 4 people could decide to not bring a piece of legislation to the floor. You're worried about something somebody you don't agree with wants to put forward, 4 of us can say, no, that's not happening. And we already have seen it. Some of the more conservative members wanted to move forward with this thing they call the fair tax, 30% consumption tax. Some of my friends, by the way, right-wingers, will say to me, that's the fairest tax there is. And I say it's among the most regressive taxes there are. We can disagree. It's a sales tax. You call it a consumption tax. 4 of us from New York said to the leader, the speaker, we're not voting for it. And so what did the speaker come out and say a few weeks later? We don't have votes, it's dead. And so there will be moments where we get to do that. I can tell you that's happened on probably 3 occasions already, even on issues that you do care about. For instance, there was a bill that they were going to move forward to limit access and federal funding to contraception. I don't support that. I think that and so understand, I've been very clear on this. I wouldn't vote for a national ban. I respect what's happened with the Supreme Court decision. I respect that states now have a role that up until only a few months ago, they didn't. But I do expect that women, regardless of where they live in this country, have access, especially if it's federally supported, have access to prenatal and neonatal care that is safe, regardless of the choice they make, and that's the obligation we have And so, many of us said, no, it's not gonna come to the floor, and it was removed. In fact, I received an email or some, text or messages from some of you actually worried about that, maybe not you personally, but worried about that bill. We said, no, we're not gonna move on it, and it was removed. I associate myself, just so you're aware, and some of my right-wing friends don't like it, some of my left-wing friends don't. I associate myself with the pragmatic wing of my party, which are, we don't want forest fires, we don't want dumpster fires, we don't want to create crises, we don't want to go over cliffs. We do, however, want reasonable reforms and respect for the people that we represent, the ideas we have, and then mold consensus towards a solution. That's where I associate myself. And so for the 2 years I'm guaranteed to be here, unless I choose or something bad happens to me, I hope nothing does. I intend to associate myself with those people in my conference, trying to move forward on those things that we think are important and there's general agreement for. So that's the why, is because this is where I am, and I intend to stay here and fight for the things I believe in.
Back over to this side.
Hi, Congressman Molinaro.
Just Mark.
Okay, so we heard earlier a good overview of all the green energy things that are being developed in this community, this county, this state. On January 27th, we voted yes to HR 21, the Strategic Production Response Act, which would limit the authority of the President and Department of Energy to use an oil stockpile, and at the same time open more lands and oceans to fracking and drilling. You also voted no to an amendment that would protect the North Shoreline by blocking the oil and gas drilling and any track off the coast or the remaining of any hill. It takes about 5 to 10 years to start producing oil from a new offshore lease, so it won't help with today's gas and oil prices. So why are you folks doing that?
So,
And one more thing, the assault front.
and just throw it in. Starting where you start first, what you didn't, either, if you've done your own research, you didn't find it, or it wasn't shared with you, but we actually adopted an amendment to that very bill earlier in the day. It was unanimously accepted, and it was added to the bill that did preclude offshore drilling along the entire East Coast, from Florida to Maine. The problem was that those other amendments that you refer to, now I'm new here, and so I'm not used to the way they come up with games. And Republicans did it when they were in the minority, and Democrats are doing it now.
There were like 4,000 amendments.
Right, I think it was Steny Hoyer who called them partisan votes. In other words, every time the Democrats took the main bill and they put forward the main bill when they were in the majority, Republicans would throw out these poison pill amendments that couldn't be implemented in the main bill, forcing Democrats to vote on it. And then people like me would say, how dare the incumbent Democrat vote against that? And they're partisan maneuvering to get you to be able to say, I didn't vote for something that ultimately I may very well, if the bill comes up in its fresh form. So there were 76 amendments that day. I think we did them in like 3 hours, which is unheard of.
So do you support fracking and drilling?
Let's just,
the Strategic Petroleum Reserve was not created, not built, not designed for ongoing depletion to control economic norms. It wasn't. And so the president has to acknowledge that first, we are at the lowest point we've been in 40 years. And so what that means is that reserve is for your security. It's to be sure that if we have a massive environmental, we have an earthquake that rips apart the country, where are we going to move? How are we going to be able to access the petroleum that we still need, regardless of what you think? We're still going to need it in the short term, to your point. That's what it's there for. War, when maybe supply lines are being interrupted, that's what it's there for. It isn't used to arbitrarily manipulate the economy. And that's what is being done. Now, I love the outcome, don't you? You're paying 14 cents less a gallon than we did, or 50 cents less a gallon than we did only a few weeks ago or months ago. You're still paying $2 more than we paid 2 years ago. And that's, I think it's, although I did find in Catskill, $2.85. I don't know why. But my point is, gas prices are still astronomically high. But I do want to correct you on one thing, and I'll say this very respectfully. You know, gas prices are a futures market. And so whether it takes 3 years or 10 years, If we are sending the message that in 3 to 5 years, you can't do any of this anymore, the prices start to be affected now. If we project that you will have a transition, and I believe in transitioning, but you can't flip a switch and go from fossil fuels to electricity. That's not happening by 2030 or 2025. There needs to be a transitionary period, and America does it better than anyone else. We've had a decrease in emissions. We have led the world in environmentally sensitive ways in refining petroleum products, and the world is still reliant on petroleum products. And I would rather have good paying trade union jobs, cleaner environmentally and environmentally sensitive refining of fossil fuels than leave it to Russia, Venezuela, and other countries that don't care. And so while we make that transition, I would rather us do it here. That's not to open up more. Now, the president talked about the number of leases that are out there. There are leases that he says he's willing to allow to go forward. But the agencies responsible for approving the permits aren't approving the permits. And so therefore the lease means nothing. And so I just want a formal and organized energy policy. New York lurches about an energy policy. You know, I think you referred to the gentleman referred to kind of a little bit of that transition a moment ago. We need a realistic energy policy, and it can't be that when prices start to go up, you deplete the strategic petroleum reserve. It can't be that you just stop producing or refining petroleum products that we can do safely, cleaner, and with better jobs while we're shipping it out from where we're buying from Russia, Venezuela, and the Middle East. That isn't being honest with anyone. And so that's the balance we were looking for. And I said it when I ran. That shouldn't have come as a surprise to those who paid attention. And based on what I know, Broome County got bombarded with a lot of television and radio ads. And so you knew where we were on these issues. That's my position. I'll address, because you brought it up, listen, I do support the Second Amendment. People know this. We've had this conversation before with some others. I want us to focus on 3 things immediately. And if the president would start here, I certainly would like to see this conversation happen. You may not like the answer, but number 1, 60% of gun-related crimes are pled down to non-gun-related crimes. And that's in New York. It's even worse in other parts of the country. If we actually believe in holding people accountable for using a firearm in the commission of a crime, then they should be prosecuted and jailed for doing so. And every time we don't do that, we're giving a free pass to people who we know have violence or danger in their lives, and they're going to act out again. And many, many, many of those incidents are multiple offenders that should have been in jail the first time, not the 10th time. So I would want us to be serious about that. Number 2, adequate background checks with due process. There's 1 million background checks currently today that the FBI has not conducted. Why? Not their priority? Maybe it should be. That's something that I'd like us absolutely to focus on. And then lastly, and I've said this to you all before, and again, we may not all agree, but I want us to get serious about trauma-informed care and investing in trauma-informed care for law enforcement, teachers, all across this country. Everybody who interacts with, in particular, young people, because, by the way, most of those gun-related crimes are young boys, young men, under 25 years of age. We know they've had trauma in their life. We've experienced it. We see it. We ignore it. And then it erupts in violence against themselves or others. Invest in that and do that, and then we can have a serious conversation about driving down violence in this country.
I think we have enough time for maybe 2 more questions. 3 if there's no commentary, but then just a question.
Well, if you do that, I'll do my best to do that.
Okay. No, not Anderson.
No, I'd like shorter.
The gentleman in the back.
You're not. Thank you. The one man called me Mark.
Regarding the Second Amendment.
Yeah.
Kathy Hochul has come up with all these additional gun control laws. The only people affected are those of us that have been fingerprinted, FBI investigated, background checks, letter to the judge. Criminals are gonna get guns no matter what. And, the only ones being punished are the people with law-abiding citizens, as
I don't disagree with you. And that's why I mentioned in this state in particular, if you're serious about driving down violence, then you need to hold people who commit crimes with firearms accountable. And if you don't, then you don't actually mean it. And I am tired of listening to the governor come up with one more excuse why we can't hold people who we see committing violent crimes accountable. That is something that is just not acceptable. On the other, I will say out loud, and it's not my role, But the newest laws that came out of Albany prior of November of this year, they were meant to correct an unconstitutional set of laws. They are more unconstitutional, and they will be found unconstitutional because the state didn't take seriously what they should be doing in order to prevent incidents of violence. And the courts are going to find that. It's just going to take time ultimately. Like it or not, it's less constitutional than the set of laws they adopted.
Back to the side, in the back.
That's Jeremy.
So
Right.
I haven't been to many
High
of
school
these.
student.
This is my first one I've ever been to, but I know earlier you said that, you don't support the catcalling and people and whatnot. I want to know your stance on the sort of, the discrimination and prejudices against the LGBTQ community. And if you have like any thoughts on help building the equality between that community and, cis people and everything.
Yeah. So I believe that every person has value, period, end of sentence. I believe that you are here on this planet and deserve the same access to rights, support, as any other American, and we ought to respect people. That's what I believe. And so that's how I comport myself. That's what I think society needs to do. I don't get to choose how you choose to live your life. If you're honest and law-abiding, then you're honest and law-abiding. And the government, as more of a libertarian, and the government ought to afford you protection for your pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that's what we fundamentally believe. And that's what I fundamentally believe. That you have right to pursue your life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And the last thing I will say is pursuit of happiness. When the founders when Jefferson and the founders wrote that language, pursuit of happiness was not an emotion. It wasn't meant to suggest that we could be happy or simply love someone. Pursuit of happiness was to achieve the fulfillment of life. And so I look at life from my daughter's eyes with a disability. What is her pursuit of happiness? What is the fulfillment of her life? That's going to be remarkably different than yours, than my son, any one of my sons. And my children are going to grow up, and I want them to know that they live in a society that respects them, protects them, and supports them regardless of who they are, who they love, or how they hope to fulfill their pursuit of happiness.
Well, I think we are down, it was 6:27, and so I think we're down to the last question, and I think you have your hand raised.
I have a question about healthcare or prescription drug costs for seniors.
Yes.
Last session of Congress, Democrats passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which capped the cost of insulin at $35 a month for a copay. House Republicans have introduced legislation to completely repeal the Inflation Reduction Act. Do you support that effort or not?
I don't think a complete repeal of the Inflation Reduction Act is going to find its way to the floor. I will tell you.
Is that one of those cases where you're going to be one of the 4 votes to stop
I haven't
that?
seen I don't know the bill. I don't. But I have said in the past.
It is House Resolution number 812.
I'll look for it. I mean, I obviously, for my role, want to provide the appropriate oversight and expense of these dollars.
So you're not going to support it?
I don't know the bill. But my job and my position is I'm going to oversee. I'm going to watch the expense of dollars and ensure that we meet the intended expectation that was in the law. I don't know the bill, and I don't know what if it's all pieces of. I don't even remember when.
Complete repeal.
So let me. I don't see that finding its way this morning. Okay. Again, I want to repeat. We didn't get to all of your questions. I certainly respect that and appreciate that. But I want you to feel comfortable reaching back to us. Email, call. This won't be the last time. We'll do this as often as I can make it work. But there'll be smaller forums, bigger forums, but the goal here is to be as responsive to you as possible. Thank you for spending time with me this evening, and thank you for the honor of representing you in the House of
Hey.